Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another biology screencast. As you can see, I'm filming from our classroom, which is very empty. I hope you've been able to keep up with your work that you've been getting from your other teachers and keeping up with our summative assessment in biology. So the reason for this screencast is to just touch base, and I want to go over part of stage 5. Now I know some of you have completed stage 5 and moved on to stage 6. Others of you are in the middle of stage 5, yet others are still beginning. But I do want to review kind of the codon length and its importance for your artificial code that you're designing. So let's start with a little bit of review. Now we know that DNA and RNA are composed of 4 bases. DNA and RNA both have adenine, cytosine, and guanine bases. However, in DNA, they have thymine, and in mRNA, uracil is the basis used. So the code itself is using these 4 different bases, and as you probably already know, right, the genetic code groups these 4 bases in groups of 3. So with a little bit of math, we can figure out, all right, if we have 4 bases, all in groups of 3, that gives us a possibility of 64 different codons, right? 64 different codes for starting, stopping, and coding for amino acids during the process of translation. So those 64 codons, all right, we have 3 that are stop codons, which you are kind of familiar with. We have 1 start codon, and this start codon also codes for an amino acid methionine, abbreviated as MET. And then there's 60 other codons that code for the other 19 amino acids. So 60 plus 3 plus 1, 64 possible codons. Now, you realize that if there's only 20 amino acids, right, and we're including methionine in this, the one that's also as a start codon, that there's some redundancy in this genetic code. Redundancy meaning that a single amino acid can be coded for by more than 1 codon. So let's take a look at redundancy and how we can see that in the genetic codon chart and genetic codon wheel. All right, so let's take a moment and let's highlight maybe this right here, glycine. We can see here that this 1 amino acid, glycine, is coded for by 1, 2, 3, 4 different codons. Over here, let's look up here. Here we can see that this particular amino acid, abbreviated as HIS, histidine, is coded for by 2 amino acids. And the one just below also has 1 amino acid, 2 codons code for that 1 amino acid. We can see that on the codon chart, the wheel rather, as well. So if we go here, we can see, okay, if we have an A, a T, and a T, it codes for this amino acid, which is abbreviated as I, which is isoleucine. We go here, A, T, C, same amino acid is coded for. A, T, A, same amino acid is coded for. So this redundancy, why exactly does the genetic code have redundancy? What purpose does that redundancy actually serve? So what I'd like you to do is answer this question right here of what is the advantage of the redundancy in the genetic code? It exists, maybe what's the purpose of it existing? So take a moment please and just answer that question. So if we go back here, we see that there's redundancy, and it doesn't prevent mutations from happening. Mutations are still going to occur regardless, right? And there is actually a function, it is kind of important, because if a substitution mutation were to happen, then we know from looking at this, you know what? If one base were to change into another base, maybe the same amino acid would be coded for, and the sequence of amino acids in the protein would stay the same. Now, it'll have absolutely really no effect if there's a deletion mutation or an insertion mutation, because that reading frame, will be shifted. However, when we're looking at a substitution mutation, it's going to reduce the effects of that, right? All right. So we know in our engineering design challenge, you have to develop a synthetic genetic code that minimizes the change in amino acid sequence in a protein due to mutations. So you want to think maybe, how can you use redundancy in a way that actually accomplishes this, that it actually minimizes the change in amino acid sequence, right? You also know that part of the design constraint is that your code cannot use 4 bases, you can only use 2 bases, cytosine and guanine. And we're going to represent cytosine using the letter X and guanine representing the letter O. Now, if we can only use 2 bases, what does that mean about the number of possible codons that we can actually code for? Well, let's consider this. Let's consider if we have a 2-bit code. So we're using a binary code, only X's and O's. We're saying, okay, we're going to take these 2 bases, these 2 letters, and we're going to arrange them in 2 ways, or in groups of 2. And you can see here, I've listed all the possible ways that we can represent those 2 bases. We can have an XX, an XO, an OO, or an OX, right? So if we have 2 bases arranged in groups of 2, there's 4 possible codons possible. All right? So we know 4 codons isn't possibly enough to code for all 20 amino acids, plus the start and the stop codon. So what if we had these binary codes of X's and O's, and what if we arranged them in groups of 3? How many codons could we possibly come up with then? Well, why don't you try to do the calculations and then answer this question right here. How many codons could be generated using a 3-bit binary code? Going back to our previous screen, we see the math, and if you answered that question, then you should have realized, right, well, if we have 2 bases still, we're not changing the number of bases, but we arrange them in groups of 3, then we can have 8 possible codons, right? And again, I listed for you all those possible combinations there so you can see. Hopefully you're getting a better idea of the math, but just to practice one more time, we can see again, 8 possible codons isn't going to be enough to code for all 20 amino acids plus a start and a stop codon. So what if we used a 5-bit code? How many codons could be generating using a 5-bit binary code? Try to set up the math, do the calculations, and see what you get. All right, so now we're going back to this screen right here, and we know, again, our code must represent all 20 amino acids as well as the start and stop codons. So you're going to have to figure out what's the minimum length or minimum bit code that you need to generate this, right? You also kind of need to keep in mind that the codon size should be minimized. I'm looking at that last bullet point here. You need to keep the codon size relatively small because the cost of the programming the nanobots is dependent upon the size of the codon. So if the codon is too terribly long, it's going to be too expensive and we're not going to be able to sustain that kind of production, right? But then again, we're also talking about the redundancy of the code and maybe some of the benefits that apply there. So you kind of have to weigh these 2 options. Right. One last thing to consider here, I'm pulling up that memo that we actually started here, and we're talking about some of the design constraints. We were also given this kind of information right here, and I'm going to use the whiteboard just to highlight this. So if we're looking right here at this last sentence, it says the reliability of the nanobot activity has also been found to be inversely proportional to the range of codon length in preliminary testing. This is also something that you're going to want to take into account when you're trying to construct your own synthetic code. So hopefully this information kind of helped, and I'm going to get rid of that. Hopefully this information kind of helped, set you in the right direction. Remember, you should be able to explain kind of why you chose the codon length that you did. You should say what kind of what inspiration you drew from the natural code, and then maybe how you kind of tweaked that. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please join our biology community. If you check Google Classroom, I posted a link to join the biology community. There you can interact with all the other biology students here at WBAIS, post questions, answer other people's questions, and even post resources that you found that you think might be helpful. All right. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.